Hello, everyone. Just want to make a small comment. I've been craving for ice cream ever since Amy mentioned that ice cream analogy. I'm not sure if I'm the only one, but I'll try to survive. Do we have the... OK, so I'd like to introduce a concept which I call flow. And it's something I've been using increasingly on a number of clients and projects, whether it's broadcasting, VRT, or Penguin, Random House, or Adidas. And I want to speak about flow and flow design. And in a nutshell, flow essentially refers to the way in which bits of content are released, connected, and presented over time and across platforms. And I think each content organization, or each type of content organization, there's a few in the room, has a heritage in a particular type of flow, which they're best equipped, structured, and organized to deliver. I'm doing in sync over the video, as you can see. So you got television and radio broadcasting are very good at linear flow. They understand linear flow best, how to schedule a day or an evening. Facebook and Twitter understand algorithm-based feeds best, consisting of pictures, audio, and video. And then you've got newspapers who understand best how to editorially put content on a page, whether it's online or offline. So these are all very basic flows that we're very familiar with and that are very common. But I think in the next 5 to 10 years, what you'll see is an emergence of new types of flow for the digital world, nonlinear flows, and all different kinds. And I think the main art and craft that any content organization will have to master is how to create and think about those digital flows. Because it's a world where there's no fixed rule book. There's many platforms, there's more combination, there's more freedom, there's more potential journeys. There's more shelf space. So we can tinker and experiment with how we play with content across platforms, across mobile, online, television screens, social, and which types of flows work best. And I think there's 3 critical questions when it comes to thinking about flows. There's releasing content, which is where and at what frequency do you release content and what type of content. The second is about connecting content, which is about how do you create connections between different bits of content and how do you create journeys. And the third one is about presenting content, which is how do you package and present content in the most engaging way. And all 3 have to do with one and the same goal, which is how do you, and that's the aim of flow design, which is to maximize the potential reach of each individual bit of content and to make sure you reach a biggest audience as possible. So now I'm done with the animation, so I can actually don't have to follow what's on the screen. And what basically I want to do is give you 10 examples of flows and emerging ways in which content organizations think about flow. So one is what I call repackaged flow. And there's an amazing, I think Jeff Jarvis referred to it as well, there's an amazing report, innovation report from the New York Times, which was leaked. Which is about 90 pages. I think it's the best reading on how to cope with digital content and how to cope in a digital landscape. And they talk about the successes and the challenges they've had as an organization. And one of the 2 examples they actually mention, which they say were particularly successful, is where they repackaged old archive content into a new flow. So as many companies in this room, New York Times sits on a mountain of old archive content, which sits behind closed door and isn't particularly accessible to users unless you search for it. So what they did is they, on particular occasions or events, they took old content and repackaged it. So on the left-hand side, that's what they did for Valentine this year. They had an article called Vows of Love, and they took 9 videos, all to do with love. This is what you talk about on Valentine's Day. And they bundled it into an article and published it. On the right-hand side, another experiment, they had a series of stories all around sex trafficking, all written by the same author in the last 2 decades. So over a period of 20 years, this guy had been talking about the subject, and they created this article that gave a summary of all these different pieces. Both articles had no new content. It was all repackaged old content. And both were immense hits and were shared massively on social, just because it was a right angle and it repackaged in an interesting new way into a new flow old content. And I think for any organization who has access to heaps of archive and old content, that content could still be brought to users by putting it in a new flow. And linked to that is what I call replicable flow. So the examples I gave from the New York Times, the sex trafficking story, the love story, these were one-off pieces. But what they then started to think is, what if we created a format or a tool that allowed anyone to create what they call collections of old stories? So you could actually drag and drop old content into this tool, which is like a widget-type tool. You could drag and drop content into it, and it creates a collection. And anybody at the New York Times can create such a collection. And even it can expand to users, where users or readers can create their own collections. So what it becomes is, rather than this one-off piece beautifully crafted, you get a replicable format that you can use over and over again. I think one of the things that was in that New York Times report was we undervalue replicability, which I thought was really interesting, because a lot of effort sometimes goes to one-off, beautiful, crafted digital experiments, and they get out, they get a certain traffic, a certain audience, and then afterwards it disappears. And actually thinking about replicable formats that you can keep using over and over again, and a company I think does that really well, and puts a lot of effort and time and energy into it, is BuzzFeed. And they come up with formats, and one of them is, for instance, quizzes. They have these interactive quizzes where really interesting questions I'm sure you want to have an answer to. How much do you hate going out? Which 90s talk show host are you? What period in history do you actually belong in? All types of ridiculous questions, and you've got a title, and then you've got a whole series of boxes that you can tick. Type in BuzzFeed quizzes, and you can join some of them, and then you click certain boxes, and then you get an answer on the question. And that's a little format they thought out, a particular flow that you go through, and because it works so well, anybody can use it. It's a little format, and any editor at BuzzFeed can create their question. It could be based on the current events, and this is just one example, and they have a little button that says quizzes, so you've got all 1,426 quizzes that have been created. And it's just a replicable format that can be used over and over again. Seamless flow is really about how do you put different types of content together in a way that it feels seamless. How do you put video, text, audio, pictures, other types of content together in a way that it feels seamless, and it's not a clunky embeddable YouTube video in between two pieces of text. I think this is becoming, an art in and of itself, is how do you create this seamless interaction. I think one example that many of you might know is Firestorm, Guardian. If you don't, I don't have an interactive bit here, but if you Google Guardian Firestorm, you can actually just click it and see how it looks like. It's this beautiful, immersive story about this family that fled from bushfires and then fled from their house. They had to hide under a bridge. And there was this beautiful picture that was posted in the newspapers, and the Guardian thought, what if we told the story of that family and how they fled their house and how they survived? And so they created this really long immersive experience where you start from the family noticing that there's a fire, and you've got a bit of video. It moves into text. It then moves into an audio snippet with the son saying something. It then goes into video again. You sort of go through this experience, really tangible, immersive experience. And what I think is interesting is that this is a whole new way of structuring different bits of content in one seamless flow. And so some of the learnings they got from it was, one is you have to get technical people and editorial people into one room. They said it couldn't have worked if we had them separate. You have to have technical people who think about the interaction design and editorial people working hand in hand. Another one is really the intricate nature of how text, video, and pictures work together. So they figured out if there's video being shown on a screen, the text that overlays the video needs to be a lot more sparse. It needs to be more dense, less adjectives, more pure. So these are things they can only learn by doing and by mixing the types of content. Another one is about duration. They thought, how long can we stretch this story? How long will people interact with it? And they thought probably the limit is about half an hour. I know Jeff Jarvis listened to 1.5 hours on Google on a podcast, but they figured out probably half an hour is the maximum. I think it shows that this team of people who did this, and they wrote a whole story about how they came about it, this was a first experiment they had to figure out as they went along. I think for broadcasting, a really important one is online first flow, where content actually originates digitally in an online environment and then actually moves to linear flow later. And there's plenty of examples in this area, whether it's the BBC iPlayer, who went from a catch-up TV service to a destination for entertainment, which is now experimenting with pop-up channels, online channels. Or there is SVT, the Swedish broadcaster, who's launched Flow, where you get a playlist, suggested playlist of 10 programs, and some of it is from linear TV, but some programs originate online. Or it's Love Mila from YLE Broadcasting, who are here in the audience today, where they first seed out the content, 5-minute snippets, short-form content on Facebook, on YouTube, on Instagram, and only later, and on Arena, their on-demand platform, and only later it actually appears on broadcast. I think these are all examples where you've got increasingly content journeys originating online, only for later to appear off in broadcast. And I think that's going to be, in the next 5 years, an increasingly important flow. Data-driven flow is where data and algorithms define how content flows across platforms. And most social media, including, and also Netflix and Amazon, most of the way in which content is presented to you and which way you navigate through content is determined by algorithms. But I think, even though that might seem colder than when it's done through human editorial interventions, I think there's really interesting ways to think about how algorithms or data can help shape how you present content. And I think Mashable.com is a really interesting one, because they redesigned their entire web page, and they worked in 3-column structure, going from the new stuff on the left, the next big thing, and what's hot. And that's how their entire website is structured. No matter which topic you choose, whether it's news or business or tech, doesn't matter what, there's always these 3 columns. On the left-hand side, you got the new content coming in. So you got the new stuff is the articles that nobody read yet, the new information and things coming in. And then, based on the data that they get from social media, content then moves from the first column to the second column. And the second column is the next big thing. It's things that are not yet trending, but are starting to be picked up on social. Which is interesting, because that's the column where you want to go. And you don't want to look dumb by retweeting or posting or sharing something which has already been shared by everybody else, which mostly happens to me. So in the second column, you can be ahead of the curve because of the predictive algorithm that Mashable is using. And then when something's really trending, you go to the right-hand column. So that's all not driven by a curator or an editor who makes those choices. It's done by an algorithm that automatically picks up data from social and puts it in this particular format. But I think the 3-pillar structure in the columns is interesting to think about how they present the flow. Follow flow is when content is pulled in versus pushed out. So again, in the New York Times report, there's a whole section about how they're really performing when it comes to allowing users to pull in content if, where, and when they want to. So if you wanted to follow a certain subject on New York Times, you had to put in your email. It's quite laborious. It's quite sort of hidden away. So they said, actually, what we really need, and that's one of the recommendations from the report internally, they said, what we need is a follow button, that for every piece of content, for every theme, for every subject matter, whether it's really minute as organic food or something more broad, we need to allow people to follow and pull in articles around that topic and get following inbox where you get the content pushed in. I think for, again, for broadcasters, given the live nature of TV and radio, RealTime Flow is an absolute critical one, which is all about creating, publishing content in the moment. And actually at VRT, we call it pirates. We call these people who publish and create content in real time. We call them pirates. I'm not sure if they want to be called pirates, but that's what we call them. And we speak about a pirate mentality, because what they do is they look at the linear flow, they look at, among others, and they pick from it, they mix it, they complement it with other types of content. And I think one of the key things is we have to think, when it comes to real-time flow, in smaller units of content, smaller chunks, atomized content. So rather than long-form content, real-time is much more about the smallest piece, the smallest unit of content, an animated GIF, a tweet, a quote, an image, a short-form video, So real-time is more about those types of content. And this is an animated GIF from a BBC Africa documentary, and BBC did this really nice promotion where throughout the program, as it was broadcast, they released all kinds of animated GIFs from key moments that were most tweeted and talked about on social, and they picked those moments, turned them into animated GIFs, and spread them out. And this, I think, another example of how thinking in smaller units of content can change how you act in real time is ITV News. ITV News tended to have a quite clunky, slow website, and what they changed is they allowed any journalist within ITV News to publish with a really simple publishing tool every small bit of content they wanted. So whether it's just a sentence or a picture, or whether it's a combination of a video with a line. So they allowed journalists to publish very small, bite-sized bits of content in real time, and it changed the stream and the speed at which ITV News published news. And since then, since they changed that interface, which allowed people to post much more easily, they've been both seen a huge skyrocketing of traffic, but also secondly, they became the first news organization in the UK to continuously break stories as the first, because they were so quick and the tool allowed them to be quick. And I think that then makes you think differently about planning flow. Depending on what type of content organization you are, you tend to plan more or less in advance. Newspapers tend to think one day in cycles of a day, and what you see in digital-first organizations that the units in which they plan are much smaller. So there's this amazing line from that report that says, New York Times, that we need to think in second-hour stories and not in second-day stories. So for instance, there was this one story they brought out. There was a national football player that came out as a gay man, and they brought the story. Nice interview, video, the whole Shazam, really nice, packaged, put online. And then they thought, so what will we do tomorrow? Actually, some of the competing organizations, which were more digital first, they had been planning out this story hour by hour. So not just did they publish the initial bit of content, but then they had a plan for how to update the story on an hourly basis. And New York Times realized we don't have a second-hour plan, we don't have a third-hour plan. So we need to start thinking in smaller units of hours rather than days. And I think also for broadcasting, it becomes interesting. And I think this, what you see is the emergence of all these tools that allow you to do this more minute, detailed planning of content. And then the last one is predictable flow. Because if you think about flow, you think about rhythm. So, and what rhythm do you release and publish content, and how does it affect your expectations as a user? And TV and radio have a particular flow to it. They have a particular rhythm to it and sets certain expectations. The same goes with Facebook or with Twitter. But when you think about other services which are more curated, you can have a more a different type of rhythm and therefore set a different predictability. So Mubi.com, which is an indie film streaming service, they do one film a day, and the film is online for 30 days, and then it disappears. So every month, you have 30 films, not more, not less. It's a steady rhythm. They do a very simple offering of $2.99 a month. You can watch the film. You get an email in your inbox saying, this is the film we picked for you today. This is why we picked it, which I think is a really interesting service when you think about it. Doesn't have to be about infinite catalogs or about huge streams. This is just one film every day presented to you, handpicked by someone that thinks they know what you want. Nowness.com, similar. This is a fashion/luxury blog, and they're very renowned. They have huge followers, following, just because they do one story, beautifully crafted, selectively picked every day. Not 2 stories, not 5, not 10. It's not BuzzFeed. It's not any of the. It's not Vice. It's just one beautifully crafted, and they even have the navigation of the site. They use a calendar, so you can actually follow the story of that day. I think you'll see more of these flows where each content proposition has its own very specific rhythm. So what I'd like to leave with is, I think it's really important to experiment with nonlinear flows and with flows in a digital world. I think yesterday, Steen from VRT Startup gave the VRT Startup story, and that's what we do. We think about what are different ways to actually create journeys. Where do we start? Do we start on a website and drive people into social? Do we start on social, drive people on a website? Is a website even relevant? Do we need to have an app? Is that the place where the journey starts? And some of these insights come as we experiment and try things out. And I think there's a few things that were said this morning, which I thought was quite powerful. Jeff Jarvis said that digital first essentially means that the old product becomes the byproduct. And I think for radio and television, the old product is linear flows. I think linear flows should be the byproduct. Nonlinear flows should be the primary product. And when it comes to the people doing this, and that relates back to a question I think was asked this morning, what type of talent do you need in a content organization today? I think to do these types of experiments, you need people who are, don't come from a linear flow background. You need people who are UX designers, who are content architects, who think in nonlinear flows, people like Brian, for instance. So you need a different type of person, and I think what the problem is with talent is that there's very few people who have a huge track record in experimenting and tinkering with nonlinear flow, because it's all fairly new. And I think that's going back to what Martin Sorrell said about a lack of talent. I think one of the things you'll see here is that we'll just have to go along and experiment as we go. And I think this one point, yes, I wanted to say something about the theme, which was 2024. I have no idea what's going to happen in 2024. I'm not going to pretend I do. But I do know is that the only way to make or see what's going to happen even in 5 years' time is by experimenting with these types of models today, in 2014, 2015, 2016. And the only way to see the future is to make it. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much.